One other thing I want to kind of get into quickly. I think it's an interesting story. I addressed it last week. For those who didn't know we existed before we popped up on your T2 screen, we've been at this for a long time, like a month, really long time. Like we are established. We're not. But we had a great episode with Max Eisenbud, who is, Agent Sharapova, Lina Raducanu, Madison Keys, Ayla Tomjanovic, a bunch of great players, and he's had a bunch of great relationships. And I asked him a question. Mike, can you pull up the clip about Emma Raducanu?
How are we supposed to cover her? Do I cover her with a critical eye of someone who was 10 in the world and won the U.S. Open? Or am I supposed to cover her as someone who's still figuring out what they're doing because she was in school 4 years ago?
I think it's a really good question, and thank you for asking. I think overall, the media has done a really good job, especially the British media, because that's not easy. I would say that I just think people should not be malicious. I think anything else is fair game. If you want to rip her serve, or you want to rip that she hasn't won 3 matches in a row, but I think just don't be malicious to her, because the girl did everything backwards. She skipped every step. She won the U.S. Open.
Amazing.
She went to the next tournament. She didn't even know where the player lounge was. She didn't know where the practice courts were. She didn't know anything where anything was.
Well, the stat was, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, and if I'm off, it's like barely off. She had won more matches. Listen to this, that she won more matches in that tournament than she had ever won on tour up until that point, right?
Yeah, she never played any tour. So I just ask people...
7 matches in that tournament. I think she'd won like 4 before ever on tour, something like that.
Yeah, so I just think if people are just not malicious, and I don't think being tough on her or critical on her like any other player, but she's still figuring it out. It was very hard what she did. But she's a really good tennis player, and I think she's going to figure it out. And I will tell you that once she gets second week in a tournament, she's not going to be afraid to win it.
One of many great answers that Max Eisenbud gave us during the course of that interview. This was 2 minutes of it. There is a whole hour and 10, 15 minutes already on our YouTube channels, Apple, Spotify, and all the places that you get your podcast. If you haven't already listened to that interview, please go listen to it. Jon, tell us your thoughts on Max's response there.
Yeah, I always think, let me ask you a personal question. Have you ever been to Landisville, Pennsylvania? And you were probably asking, why in the world is he asking me about Landisville, Pennsylvania? And the reason is in August of 2021, that is an event that Emma Raducanu played. $100,000 challenger, and did not win the event. August of 2021, Landisville, Pennsylvania. And 6 weeks later, she's winning the U.S. Open. And so I think sometimes we forget just how absolute outlier a story this is. I mean, this is just a batshit crazy story. And this is a player who had to qualify for the main draw, and then she wins the U.S. Open. And so you take a step back and you sort of say, well, we have this before, and there are plenty of times, I'm just pick a name. Gustavo Kuhn comes from nowhere and wins the French Open. And you say, you know what, though? He was a really, really good tennis player. He'd go on, he'd become number 1, he'd be a Hall of Famer. Not every player that comes out of nowhere and wins a major resurfaces. And I don't know how much of this is regression to the mean. I don't know how much of this is, there are a lot of pressures. Your life gets turned on its head. Suddenly you have 8 figures of net worth. You have all of these obligations that were completely alien to you just a few weeks before. I try to keep in mind how young she is. I mean, this is somebody who would be a college tennis player if a couple of balls didn't go over the net a couple of certain ways.
Yeah.
And it's a really strange set of circumstances, but I think we need to kind of step back and realize what an absolute outlier her winning this major was. And I don't know, maybe she'll win a second one. Maybe she is what she is, and this was lightning in a bottle, and she's a top 100 player and not much more. I think every player views you a little differently now that you've won a major. A lot of good players who have never won a major, Emma Raducanu can see them in the locker room and say, I've got something you have. I think sometimes the coverage has bled over into me. I think some of it's not appropriate for someone her age.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a little tricky. On the one hand, you want to say give her space, give her time. She's already achieved more in her career than 99% of players would ever achieve. At the same time, yeah, it's a little weird. Somebody who won majors and has Tiffany deals and endorsements and is Time Magazine People of the Year needs wild cards to get into main draws. I think we need to let this play out a little. I do think. I mean, everything that you hear about. Total candor. Everything you hear is great kid. The father's a bit of a handful. And I know people who have interviewed to be coach and have walked away saying, yikes. And I know that the father at one point was talking about having different coaches for different strokes. Why do you just need one coach? You have one coach to teach you how to return. You have another coach for backhand, another hand for forehand. I don't know. We applaud innovation. We applaud outside the box thinking. At the same time, I'm not sure that's a great a bit of chaos there. It doesn't really suggest stability. So and point being, there are a lot of variables here. I think it's fair to sort of wonder what happened to this player who had this terrific breakthrough. I think it's also fair to say, wait a second, she played a Landisville ITF USTA $100,000 event the month before she won her major. It's kind of fascinating. I like Max's advice. I mean, it's a weird fact pattern. Be fair, don't be mean. She's not immune to criticism, but the flip side is let's not lose sight of how extraordinary the story is. How's that?
I agree.
How's that for saying a lot of nothing?
I agree with everything you just said, and also, you are what your ranking says you are. Right at a certain point. So not saying she's not a top 30 potential, but right now she has to work her way back. She has not played enough matches. Do I think scheduling Indian Wells, where if you lose first round, all of a sudden you have 2.5 weeks before you play another match? For her, she needs matches anywhere. I don't care if it's in a parking lot for $1. You need matches to get back into the rhythm of things. There's a different body resistance with tournament matches versus practice. You cannot recreate those pressure systems, right? I never once in my entire life cramped in practice in my entire existence, right? And I could practice for 7 hours. And sometimes in 3 hours into a match, because of the emotional toll, the nerves, everything else, I would cramp. You cannot recreate it. And this spacing is odd to me. Only playing thousands on the way back in slams, I would, if I was her coach, I would say we're Indian Wells, we'll see how it goes. But then if not, we're going to get 3 challengers in instead of playing Miami, and I would get fired. So that's
a really good point. Yeah.
That's kind of where we're at. She needs matches. Andre Agassi coming back, remember the thing, flipping his own scoreboard at the Vegas Challenger.
You have 141. Yeah, exactly.
You have to create confidence. Confidence is not created in practice. Improvements are made in practice. Technical adjustments are made in practice. Fitness can be largely made in practice. Confidence cannot be created. It can be held in practice. It cannot be created in practice.